Welcome to Decode. I'm Kellen Mace, and in this video, we're going to be talking all about doing authentication in Headless WordPress projects. We'll see how we can tweak the settings of our WordPress backend so that it accepts the authentication cookies, not only for the domain where WordPress lives, but also for the domain where our decoupled front-end JavaScript app lives. This allows us to use the same native auth system that WordPress has to authenticate users in both places. After that, we'll see a front-end Next.js app that makes use of this new authentication superpower and allows users to log in, log out, sign up as a new user of the site, perform password resets, view gated content that's only accessible to logged-in users, and more. Before we get too deep into the specifics, let's take a high-level view of what we're going to be working with. You can see here that I have a WordPress install, and it lives at api.runthroughmusichistory.com. It's just a domain from another project I had laying around. And we have a few plugins here that help us make the cores settings tweaks that I mentioned to allow auth cookies to be used in our front-end JS app. And then the user-facing Next.js app I have here. So runthroughmusichistory.com is the domain at the moment I'm using for this front-end app. So you can see here, currently I'm a logged out user, so I can view the home page, which I'm on now. I can go to log in and do that. I can go to sign up as a new user. If registrations are turned on for that WordPress site, I can sign up this way with my first name, last name, email. Or if I've forgotten my password, I can click forgot password and then go through a whole password reset flow. For now, let's just see what it looks like when we log in. So I'll enter my username and then a password. And now I've been authenticated. So you can see my Next.js app has now re-rendered, and I have new things available to me in the top nav bar. I have new links to pages that only authenticated users are meant to see. And also I've been sent to this members page here. You can see it says here's some top secret members only content. So this is where users are sent after logging in. From here, I can visit this members page that I'm on currently. I can go to my profile page. So if I, as a user of this app, wanted to change my first name, last name, email, or whatever other details that your app may want to expose at this point, I can do so and then hit a button to update my profile. And you'd see that reflected in the WordPress backend if you go check that user's profile. I can go to create post here, and if I say hello, new one, testing, poop emoji, something like that. I'll click create post. It says post successfully created. And now if I head over to the domain where WordPress lives, if I were to go to posts, I would see my new one on the list. Here it is. If I click through to that, you can see that the content for this post is what we set it to, testing poop emoji. Now doing just a simple blog posts like that isn't very useful, but this gets very useful once we get into custom post types and having users able to submit data for custom post types from our front end. So with that, we'll log back out and then start from square one. We'll go through how to set up and configure your WordPress backend to provide this this auth functionality for both domains, and then we'll explore in detail this Next.js app to see how each of these pages works. Next, let's dive into getting this code base up and running on your machine. We'll first need to install a few plugins. So WP GraphQL, WP GraphQL cores, and Headless WP email settings. And I'll include all of these in the video description, links to all of these plugins. The most important on this list, the one we'll discuss right now, is WP GraphQL cores. Cores, if you're not familiar, stands for cross-origin resource sharing. And it's this plugin that allows us to tweak the core settings of our WordPress backend so that it will accept cookies from our decoupled JavaScript app. So once we have those installed, we're able to hover over GraphQL here and go to settings and then click the tab on the top that says cores settings. Once you do that, we're going to check three boxes. So we're going to check send site credentials right there, that checkbox. And then we also want two mutations added to our GraphQL schema that we're going to make use of. So click this box to enable the login mutation. and also this one to enable the log out mutation. After you've checked those boxes, we need to, in this box here for extend access control allow origin header, this is where we need to pop in the URL for our decoupled front-end JavaScript app. So if you're working locally, like I am, this would just be localhost port 3000, just like that. So after you've checked those boxes and entered that value into this field, you can go ahead and click the button to save those changes. That's really it for the backend setup. Next, let's see how we can set up our front-end Next.js app. For that, you'll need to clone down this repo. So on my GitHub, I have this Headless WordPress authentication with native cookies repo here. So go ahead and clone that down to your machine. And once you do that, we'll need to do a few things. First one is just in the root directory of the project, we'll need to create this file. So create a .env.local file. And then inside of that, we need to define one variable. So name it just like this, next public WordPress API URL. And after the equal sign, this is where we're going to paste in the GraphQL endpoint for our local WordPress install. So you can get that in the WordPress admin if you head back to just the general settings page for WP GraphQL. That would be this GraphQL endpoint here. So for me, it's headless WP cookieauth.local/GraphQL. But for you, you just copy whatever that URL is for your local WordPress site and then paste that in here. After you've done that, go ahead and give that file a save. And we'll need to run npm install to install this project's dependencies or otherwise yarn. Then we can go ahead and run npm run dev. Now that things are up and running, let's go ahead and click on this localhost 3000 link to open up our front-end app. From here, you can take a minute to click around the site and just try logging in, logging out, maybe doing a password reset just to get a feel for how this app works. Next, let's understand at a high level how this authentication system is working. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open the browser DevTools here, and we'll look at the network tab. I'm going to log in with some valid credentials here, and then click the login button, and we'll see the GraphQL request that gets fired off once I do that. All right, so now I'm a logged in user, and let's take a look at the first GraphQL request here. So this was sent to our /GraphQL endpoint. You can see what was sent along. So here are the variables we sent along, the person's email, and then also their password. In the preview tab, we can see what came back in the response. So you can see once the login with cookies mutation was processed, we got status is success back. So that's great. Our app will make use of that. The most important thing for us to take a look at, though, is back in headers, we want to take a look at the response headers. So if we scroll down a bit, you'll see these set cookie headers here. And this is key. This is WordPress, after logging the user in, sending these set cookie headers to this domain so that the browser can save these cookies and send them with subsequent requests. So we can actually see that if we head over to application now, and I go to cookies and then click on this domain, you can see these cookies that say WordPress or WP. These are the ones being sent from the WordPress backend and saved here at this localhost 3000 domain. The most important of those is this WordPress logged in. That's the authentication cookie that shows that we're a logged in user. To get our front end Next.js app to send along this cookie with every request, we just have to add a one-liner option. So take a look at that now. So if you open up our front end code base in a code editor and then head to lib and Apollo client, this is where we instantiate a new instance of Apollo client right here that our app uses to make network requests. And you can see that we're telling it to use the URI from our .env.local file. So that's how it knows where to send the GraphQL request. And the next line here is very important, this credentials include. This is the one that tells Apollo client to include those cookies in the headers with every request back to our WordPress backend. So because Apollo will now include our auth cookie in the headers with every single request back to WordPress, WordPress will be able to authenticate the user. There's one more thing I want to cover here, and that is related to security. Now, there are many different methods that you could use to authenticate users in headless WordPress applications. But many of those involve getting some kind of an auth token and then storing that in the browser. So in local storage or maybe in a cookie. And in many cases, it would be possible for a cross-site scripting attack to occur where there's some rogue JavaScript that's running on the page somehow that's able to reach into local storage or reach into a cookie and get that auth token. And then it would be able to make authenticated requests on behalf of the user without their permission. The authentication method we've chosen here, though, does not make us vulnerable to those types of attacks. And the reason for that, we can see here in the DevTools. So if I take a look at this WordPress logged in cookie once more and look at the HttpOnly column, you can see that there's a check mark there. That check mark means that this cookie has the HttpOnly attribute. So that means it is completely inaccessible to client-side JavaScript. So if there's any rogue script running on the page or a Chrome extension or something like that, it's unable to reach into the cookies and get this value. It's completely protected from that. Now that we have a high-level understanding of how our authentication system is working, let's dive into the code. We're first going to take a look at a useAuth hook and then two other helper components that our app uses globally for things related to authentication. And after that, we'll go feature by feature and see how login works, logout works, password reset works, and so on. So heading over to our Next.js app, let's go ahead and open up the hooks folder and then open up useAuth. This is a React hook that can be used anywhere in our whole code base to get authentication data about the user. So like whether they're logged in or not, and then a few details like their first name, last name, email, and so on. So let's see how this works. We'll scroll down a bit and find the auth provider here. So how it works is when our app first boots up, we will use the useQuery hook that Apollo client provides and then pass in this getUser GraphQL query that we've built up above here. Now you can see what this does. It tries to query for the viewer. Viewer just means the currently logged in user. And then for that person, we're just asking for a few details back. ID, database ID, first and last name, their email, and then capabilities, which is an array of things that the logged in user is allowed to do on the site. So when the app first boots up, we go ahead and fire off that query, and then we get back the data for that query, the loading and error states, and then ultimately this provider passes all of these things down to the rest of our application via React context. So it passes down this logged in value, which is either true or false, user, which is all of this data about the user, and then the loading and error states. So we have that provider that's exported from this file, as well as this useAuth hook that we can call anywhere in our app to have access to this auth data. We can see where this auth provider is used if we head over to pages and then app.tsx. So you can see here that we're wrapping our app with a few providers. So one is the Apollo provider, and that's what allows us to make GraphQL requests using Apollo client. And then just inside of that, we have our auth provider. And again, that's the one that provides the authentication data to all of our application. Next, I want to look at two helper components that are used for doing conditional rendering, depending on whether the user is logged in or not. So we'll head over to components and take a look at AuthContent first. So this component is used as kind of a guard. You can wrap it around content that's only meant for authenticated users. So the members page that we're on right now is actually a good example of that. So let's go ahead and open up members, and we can see that we have AuthContent, and then we're wrapping inside of that. Here is some top secret members only content like that. So what happens is if I reload the page, you'll see a momentary loader while we're figuring out if the user's logged in. And then as soon as we learn that they are a logged in user, then things will re-render to show this message, just like that. In addition to rendering out content for authenticated users, this helper component also redirects users who are not authenticated and who shouldn't be on this current page. So let's see how that works. So I'll head back to AuthContent here, and we'll take a look at this component. If the user hits this page and we don't know whether they're logged in or not yet, we show this loading indicator momentarily. Then as soon as we know that they're a logged in user, then we know it's safe to go ahead and render any of the children nested inside this component. Otherwise, we're going to redirect them, and that's what this use effect is about here. It says navigate unauthenticated users to the login page. So as soon as we're no longer loading and we know that the user is not logged in, then we go ahead and use the Next.js router.push method and send them over to the login page where they can log in. Heading back to our members page as an example, again, of how this can be used, you would not want to put any sensitive data at this point in your JavaScript code, obviously, because then it would be accessible to users whether or not they're logged in. They could just take a look at the JavaScript bundle and see that information. So the purpose of this hook is not to guard against sensitive information being rendered, but instead to know if it's safe to proceed with rendering content that only works as intended if the user is logged in. So another example of that would be our profile page. So if I head over to the profile page, you can see here I have AuthContent, and then once we're sure the user's logged in, then we know it's safe to proceed and say that we're going to attempt to get that user's data and pre-populate the profile page and allow them to edit their own profile. Beyond that AuthContent helper hook, we have one that does just the opposite as well. So I also have UnAuthContent. This is one that does exactly the opposite, as I said. So if they're not logged in, it allows them to stay on this page. Otherwise, it will navigate authenticated users to the members page. So an example of that would be like the login page. So if you're already a logged in user and you, for whatever reason, attempted to go straight to the /login route, then thanks to this component here, it would see that you're already logged in and just send you to the members page. Next, let's explore each of the authentication features that our app offers one by one. I'll head here to the /login route, and then in our front-end app, we'll go ahead and pull up that page. So inside of the pages directory, you can head over to login and take a look at how this page works. So here, as mentioned, we have the UnAuthContent helper component, just to make sure that when users land on this page, they really are unauthenticated. Otherwise, they'll be redirected. And then if they are, we go ahead and proceed with rendering the login form. And that's the form that we see here on the page. So go ahead and click through to that, and we'll take a look at how this login form works. We'll scroll down a bit to see what's actually being rendered here. So you can see that this component outputs a form element, and then inside of that, we have a field set and then labels and inputs for each of our fields. So we have the email field as the first one right there, and then our password field below that. We have our link to the forgot password field is there. We have our submit button down here. We also have some conditional rendering going on here. So if the user's email is not valid, they would display an error message, or if their password is not valid, we display a different error message. So we saw that this is a form HTML element, and we have this onSubmit handler. So when this form gets submitted, we call the handle submit function, which lives right here. So inside of this function, you can see we're just using this code to pull out the data from those two input fields, namely the email and then the password, and we're firing off this login mutation and passing it through those two things as variables. So this login mutation, we can scroll up to see that. So that comes from here. So we call useMutation, which is a hook that Apollo client provides, and we tell it, this is the mutation we'd like to run. It's this login one, which we've defined above here. And you can see that this mutation expects two input fields. So it has login, which is a string, and then also password, which is another string. It then calls the login with cookies mutation and passes both of those two things through and gets back the status. So that's the mutation that actually gets executed when we call this login function down here. One last important thing to look at with this file is this refetch queries section here. So with this, we're telling Apollo that after this mutation completes, there's one query that we want you to refetch and try again. And that query is get user. So get user, we've seen once before. This is the one that gets imported from our useAuth file. So if we head over there, to remind ourselves, that was this query where we try to get the currently logged in users details like that. So that makes sense, right? That after we fire off our login mutation and get a success message back, then we know, oh, great. Now we know it's safe to go ahead and run a query to get the currently logged in user's details. Next, let's take a look at the log out page. So in the pages folder, I'll head down to log out and we'll take a look. So if I scroll down a bit, you can see that we have quite a bit of conditional rendering going on here. And we actually have a useEffect callback that calls the logout function immediately. So what happens is, as soon as the user hits this logout page and this useEffect callback runs, logout is executed. And if we look up, we can see where that's coming from. So there's a similar pattern to what we saw in the login mutation, where we're using the use mutation hook Apollo client provides, and telling it what mutation we would like to run. And that's defined above right here. So we're doing the log out mutation and just getting the status back. So we fire off that logout mutation right away. And we have this one line here just to determine if the user was successfully logged out. So we'll scroll down a bit and see what gets rendered in each case. So if we have not yet called the logout mutation, like the user just hit this page and it hasn't been called yet, or we're loading, meaning that request is currently in flight. If either of those are the case, then we're showing this logging out message. Otherwise, if an error occurred, we go ahead and pull the error message out and display that. If the user is still not logged out for some reason, we just fall back to a generic kind of error message saying, sorry, couldn't log you out. Please reload the page. This case should never get hit, but just in case that's there. And then ultimately, if we hit the bottom case, we know they have been logged out successfully. So we can see that in the browser here. I'll pull up the DevTools, we'll clear our network requests, and then I'll head over to the logout page and we'll watch to see what we see. So logging out, and now you have been logged out. And you can see things re-render again. And if we look at our network requests, we can confirm that the logout mutation was fired off there. And we can see in the preview that the data that came back was a success message. And just like with the login mutation we saw, when the user logs out, we want to go ahead and refresh our get user query, because that's the one that holds the current user's logged in state and their details and affects rendering in the rest of our application. So if we head back to the code and scroll up a bit, we'll see that we're telling Apollo, after you execute the log out mutation, here are the queries to be refetched, and then we're passing in get user once again. Let's take a quick minute to check out the navigation on our site. I've mentioned once or twice that it re-renders to show some menu items if the user's logged in versus others when they're logged out. So let's take a quick look at how that works. So if I head to the nav component that gets rendered at the top of our site here, we can see that it's calling our useAuth hook and then pulling out of that the logged in value and doing some decision making based on that. So you can see here we have one link that everyone always sees, and that's the home link. But then after that, we have some conditional rendering. So we're saying if the user is not logged in, then they should see the login link and the sign up link. Otherwise, if we know that this is a logged in user, they should see the members page, the page to create a post, edit their profile, and then the log out page. So you could do something very similar in your applications to do conditional rendering depending on whether or not the user is logged in. Now we'll go through the user flow for doing password resets. You can see here that I'm a logged out user and I'm on the login page. If I've forgotten my password and want to reset it, I can click right here to go to the forgot password page. Here I see a prompt that says enter the email associated with your account and you'll be sent a link to reset your password. So let's do that. I'll enter the email to my account there and then click the button to send the email. All right, and then the form goes away and I'm presented with this message that says, please check your email. A password reset link has been sent to you. So at that point, the user would go check their mail client and they'd see an email like this. So let's say their site name - password reset. So if I click on that, you can see that it says a password reset has been requested for the following account. And then at the bottom, it says you can reset your password here and a link is provided. Now in traditional monolithic WordPress sites, password reset links like this would send you over to WordPress to reset your password there. But if you notice, this link is sending us to localhost 3000/set password. So we're actually able to do this whole password reset flow all from our decoupled front end application. Another thing to note here is that we have two query string parameters. We have this key equals, and then a unique key, and then login equals, and then the user's login there, both of which WordPress requires in order to do password resets. So I'll go ahead and click this link to be sent to that set password page. So from here, I enter my password and then confirm it. So I'll enter something here, and let's say they don't match, for instance. I'll hit save password. We have a little client-side validation there just to make sure what the user has entered is valid. Now I'll go ahead and make them match. I'll try again. I'll hit save password. And then now, as you can see, the form goes away and it says your new password has been set. So from here, the user would be able to just click the link here, just shoot over to the login page, and then use their email and the new password that they just set to go ahead and log in. So now that we've seen this whole flow, let's see how the code works for this. I'll once again click the forgot password link, and we'll head over to the forgot password page. In our front end app, we'll head over to pages and then forgot password, and we'll take a look here. So we have our wrapper component for UnAuthContent, just to make sure that anybody who hits this page is an unauthenticated user. From there, once we know that they are, we go ahead and render a send password reset email form. So that's this form. Let's go ahead and click through to that form, see how that works. So we'll scroll down a bit to see what gets rendered. So here is our HTML form. You can see it has just the paragraph at the top telling the person to enter the email associated with their account. It has the label and then one input for the person's email. It displays any errors if there are any, and then has the submit button below that. When this form gets submitted, then we call the handle submit function. That's our submit handler, and that function is defined right here. So this one is pulling out the data from the email field right there, and then it's calling this set password reset email function and passing through that email as the username variable. So to see that function, we can look above, and again, this is another instance where we're using Apollo Client's useMutation hook, and we're saying the mutation we want to run is this one that we've defined above called set password reset email. That mutation expects one input field, which is the person's username as a string, and that's what we're going to pass in when we run the query. So one note here, our application uses the email address only, but several of these mutations actually work with either the user's email address or their WordPress login. So in your app, you could choose to have them enter the WordPress login, aka username, or their email. Either one of those would work. So back in our submit handler then, we go ahead and fire off that function, and then we have this line that just gives us a simple Boolean indicating whether or not the password reset email has been sent. And as soon as we know that it has, as soon as that's true, then we go ahead and render something different. So instead of rendering our form, if we know the email has been sent, then we go ahead and just render this message saying, please check your email. A password reset link has been sent to you. So that's part one of this flow. Now let's see part two. So go ahead and close these files, and we'll visit the set password page. So remember, the user, in their email, they get a link that points to the set password page, and then they click that, and they're sent to that page where they can actually set their password. This is what that page looks like. You can see here that we're pulling out two query string parameters. We're getting one called key and then one called login, and we're passing both of those through to this component, the set password form. So go ahead and click through to that component, and we'll take a look at that. So the set password form, remember, is the one that just has two fields. It just has password and then confirm password, and make sure that they match, and then sets that user's new password. So in this component, we can scroll down a bit to see what it looks like. So again, it provides a form with a couple fields. So here's the person's new password, and then here's the password confirm field. After that, if we have a client-side error message, then we go ahead and display that. One example would be if the passwords don't match, we display that. Below that, we display any server-side errors that came back. And then below that, we have our submit button. So for loading, it says saving. Otherwise, if the user just landed on this page and we aren't submitting, it says save password. So with that, let's head up and take a look at our submit handler then. So if the user types their password and then confirms that password and submits the form, then this is the function that would be called here. So you can see this one is a bit different, where instead of firing off a GraphQL request right away, we actually have one extra step. We call this validate function. And then if the form is not valid, then we bail early and we don't attempt to submit this form. So that validate function we can take a look at, and that's down below here. So we run just a few checks here. So we reinitialize the client-side error messages just to an empty string since we're starting over. And we then do a check to see if the length of the password the person entered is greater than or equal to 5. And if the password is not long enough, then we display this. We set that as the new client-side error message. Password must be at least 5 characters. And we return false so that the mutation does not proceed. Our second check here, just make sure the password submitted and the confirm password field both have an identical value. If they don't, then it says passwords must match. Otherwise, if we make it through these validation checks, we return true, and then our GraphQL mutation is actually fired off to set the person's new password. So one note here on these password requirements. You can see here that it's very lax, right? All we're requiring is that the person's password is 5 characters. And I threw this in here as an example of where in the code base you could put in some validation, but as you can see, it's very minimal. So with this, the user would be able to enter a password like 12345 or something like that, something that still passes validation, but really is a weak password. So in your app, feel free to strip this out and replace it with something more robust. If you have some kind of client-side library that measures password strength and you're requiring strong passwords, and or using a plugin server side in WordPress that enforces strong passwords on the server. So with all that said, let's head back up now to our submit handler and keep walking through that. So let's say we called our validate function and it returned true. So we passed all of our checks and we know the user entered some valid values. In that case, we fire off reset password and pass through the key and login, which we got as query string parameters in the URL, and then also the new password that person wants to use. So reset password then ultimately uses this mutation that we've defined above in the file. So you can see it expects those 3 things: key, login, password, and then will give us back the database ID of the user whose password was just set. So once we get that back, if we get back a success response and we see that the user's password was indeed reset, we then render something different. So instead of rendering our form, the form then goes away and we render this message saying your new password has been set, and then we provide the user with a link. They can click to go log in. Next, let's walk through how new user signups work. So we'll start here on the /signup page and we'll try to create a new user. So we'll say John Smith, and this person has a john@example.com email address. Now, if I click sign up here, we're going to get an error message saying user registration is currently not allowed. And that may be what you want. If your site is not a site where you want users to be able to create new accounts, maybe you want it locked down like this. But if you'd like to provide that ability to users, you can do that over in WordPress if you head to Settings, General, and then scroll down to Membership here. So if you check Anyone Can Register in the WordPress admin and save changes, now users who use their front-end application will be able to submit this form to create a new account for themselves. Users will fill out this form, and then they'll be instructed to go check their email for a link that they can click to confirm that they want to create an account, and then go ahead and set up their password. So we'll go through that whole flow now, and then we'll take a look at the code for how it works. So we'll start with John Smith at example.com here, and we'll try to submit this one more time. And there we go. So we were successful now that registrations are allowed in this WordPress install. So you can see my form goes away and I'm left with a message that says, thanks, check your email. An account confirmation link has been sent to you. So if I head over to my mail client here, I'll see this email says, Headless WordPress cookie auth, which is the name of my site, /signup, like that. So if I click on that email to open it, it says, welcome, you've successfully signed up for an account. You can set a password for your new account here. I'll go ahead and click on this link. So you can see that I'm sent to the /setPassword page in my front-end Next.js app, and that I have key and login query string parameters in the URL as well, which WordPress requires to be able to set a new password. So from here, I would be able to enter a new password for that user, confirm it, and then click the button to set that new password. From here, our new user can click the login link and then go log in using their email and the new password they just set. Let's take a look at how the code works for this sign up page. In our front-end Next.js app, I'll head over to Pages and then to Sign Up. Here you can see we have the UnAuthContent component, just to make sure users who land on this page are not already signed in. And assuming they're not, then we go ahead and render the sign up form component. So I'll go ahead and click through to that and we can take a look. Now this is the form that's displayed here with the first name, last name, and email fields. So we'll scroll down to where that is. So here's what actually is being rendered out. We have our form element, our field set, and then inside of that, each of our inputs. So one here for the user's first name, one here for their last name, one here for email. And then below that, we're just checking to see if we have any errors. If we do, then just displaying some error messaging there. And finally, below that, we just have our submit button for this form. And lastly, we just have a link at the bottom below the form that says, if you already have an account, head over here. And there's a link to go log in. If the user fills in these inputs and then clicks that submit button, then our handle submit function is called. That's referenced right here. So I'll scroll up a bit so you can see where that lives. So handle submit takes in the event and pulls out of that the values for that form, and it sends all of those through as the variables that this register mutation expects. So register comes from here, and that's the result of us calling Apollo client's use mutation and passing in this register user mutation. So I'll scroll up where we can see where that's defined. So that's right here. You can see what we're calling. So there's register user. It expects email, first name, last name, and then it passes those through here as to the register user mutation. You'll notice here that we're actually using email in two places. The username, we're setting that as their email, and also their email that WordPress uses, we're using their email for that as well. For your application, you could choose to do something different. You could, collect their username and store that, and then separate from that, collect the user's email and store that. For our application, though, we're kind of unifying them. We're saying, the user's email that they enter in this box, make that their username as well, so that the two are just one and the same. They're used for both of those. But either would work. You can, break those out if you'd like for your application. So that mutation gets fired off, and then in the response, we get the user object and the database ID inside of that. So back down in our component here, we just have a one-liner check to see if the signup was successful. So we try to go ahead and drill down to data, register user, user, and then database ID all the way to that value there. And if that's truthy, then we know our signup was successful. So if that's the case, we render something different. So rather than rendering the form here, if signup was successful, then we go ahead and render just this paragraph instead that says, thanks, check your email, an account confirmation link has been sent to you. Then when our user clicks that link in their email, they get sent over to the set password page here. And from there, it's actually the same exact flow that's used for resetting a user's password. So for both password resets and for new users registering, in either case, when the user is sent to the /setPassword route, we're actually doing exactly the same functionality where this component here is rendered. It takes the reset key and the login for that user and renders the set password form and then sets that user's new password. So if you want to see a code walkthrough for how that form works, you can head back to the password reset section of the video, and I do a full walkthrough of this component there. Next, let's check out the user profile page. So as a logged in user, I can go ahead and navigate to the profile page here, and you'll see it pulls in my current details. So all of the other forms we've seen so far in the video are just blank, but this form actually gets pre-populated with the user's current first name, last name, and email. So from here, I can modify these details if I want. So my first name is changing to Smellin, last name is Face, for instance. So if I hit the update button, a mutation is fired off, and then I get a confirmation. Profile details have been updated. If at this point I were to go to the WordPress backend to see this change, I can do so on that user's profile page. So you can see here's what it used to be. Now if I reload this page, you can see the new data was saved there. So for our application, we're only exposing the first name, last name, and email fields and allowing our users to modify those. For your app, though, you could choose to include additional fields and store even more data for that user. Now let's take a look at the code for this profile page. In our Next.js app, I'll head over to Pages and Profile. We have an AuthContent component to make sure the user is logged in, and assuming they are, we go ahead and render the profile form component. So go ahead and click through to that. And this is the form you see displayed here on the page. So this component makes use of the useAuth hook to get the currently logged in user's details. And then it pulls out of that a few things. So it gets their ID, first name, last name, and email. And these are used further down when we actually render the form. So if we scroll down a bit, we'll see the form that gets rendered there and each of the fields here. So you can see here's the first name field. And instead of it just being blank when this component first renders, instead we give it this default value. So we say if the user has a first name, render that. Otherwise, we fall back to just using an empty string there. And the same goes for last name. We use last name as that default value, and then use email for the email field. If there are any errors, we display error messages, and then we have the submit button below that. And at the top of this form, we have a check to see if the user's profile was updated. If it was, then we show this markup here to let the user know that their changes have been saved. Now let's check out our form submit handler. So here's the function that gets called on submission, handle submit, and I'll scroll up a bit so we can see that. So handle submit pulls out the values from this form into this values object, and it sends those along in addition to the user ID. So it sends all of those when it calls the update profile function. Update profile comes from this line here where we're calling Apollo clients use mutation and passing the update profile mutation that we've defined above here. So you can see it expects ID, first name, last name, email, and then it uses all four of those as input fields for the update user mutation. After the mutation completes, we ask for the user object back, and then inside of that, just the database ID for the user whose profile was updated. And ultimately, that's what we use to run this check here to see if the profile was updated. And if that's a yes, then we display our confirmation message here on the page. The last page we need to look at is create post. So here, as a logged in user, I'll go ahead and click on the create post nav menu item to be sent to the create post page. So from here, as we saw once before, I can enter some content like that, hit create post, see a creating post message briefly, and then it says post successfully created. If I then go to the WordPress admin and refresh, you'll see that the new post we created is here on the list. So you may ask yourself, why would we do this? In the WordPress admin, there's a very rich editing experience with Gutenberg and the ability to add featured images and categories and tags and all that, fanciness. It's, the content creation experience is very good in the WordPress admin. Why in the world would I do this and have my users create posts from my decoupled, JavaScript app where they get a, much worse experience? And you're right. I agree with you. For the folks who create and edit content on your site, you should have them work in the WordPress admin. As I stated once, though, earlier in the video, where this comes in handy, this kind of functionality is for things like custom post types. So one example would be, let's say you have a WordPress site where users can sign up for an account and take a course. So it's an educational site, let's say. So users create an account, they take a course, and then at the end, you want them to be able to leave a review. So what you could do in that case is in WordPress, you could register a review custom post type and use the title for the title of this person's review. The body content for that could be the body text, the review text that person left, and maybe some additional metadata like a 5-star rating or something like that. So what you could do then in your decoupled front-end application is after your user completes a course and you want them to be able to use a review, you could provide them with fields similar to the ones on this page where they can include the title, body content, and then the 1 through 5-star rating, hit a submit button, and that would result in a new review custom post type post being created in the WordPress backend. So that's one example of a practical use case for doing this. I'll go ahead and navigate back to create post now, and we'll dive into the code to see how this actually is wired up. So from here, I'll head over to pages and then create post. And here already we have a little bit of logic. So you see here we're using our useAuth hook and trying to get this currently logged in user's details. From there, we try to drill down to user.capabilities, and then we see if that capabilities array includes the published posts capability. If it does, then we know the user has that capability. They can publish posts. So in that case, we go ahead and render the create post form here. If you go ahead and try to log in as a user without that capability, though, so in WordPress, that would be somebody who's a subscriber, for example. If you log into your Next.js app as a subscriber, you won't see this create post form because that person would not have the publish post capability. You would instead see this message saying you don't have the permissions necessary. For us, though, we're logged in as a user who does have that capability, so that's why we're seeing this form here. So I'll go ahead and click through to the create post form, and we'll see how this works. So scrolling down a bit, we have this short and sweet form here. We just have one input right here for the title of this new post being created, and then another one down here for the content of that post. If any errors come back from the back end, we go ahead and display those. And then lastly, we have our submit button there at the bottom that says create post. When the user submits this form, we call our event handler here, handle submit. So I'll scroll up a bit and we'll see where that is. So that takes in that event and then pulls out of that the values that the user had submitted, and we're passing through all of those to the variables for the create post mutation. So create post uses Apollo client's use mutation and ultimately uses this create post GraphQL operation that we've defined at the top of the file here. So you can see it expects the title and then the content, and it calls the create post mutation that WP GraphQL provides and passes through those details. In addition to just the title and content, we're providing one additional detail, and we're saying we want the status to be publish. By default, newly created posts are drafts. So in this case, we're saying any new posts created using this form, we want them to go straight to a publish status. Assuming the post was created successfully, then this was post created Boolean will be a true value. And when that happens, rather than rendering the form here, we instead render this paragraph tag that says post successfully created. Next, let's talk about one of the implications of using the same cookies to authenticate users for both WordPress and for the decoupled JavaScript app. And that is that when users are logged in on one of those, they're also logged in on the other. Likewise, when users are logged out on one of those, they also get logged out on the other, which makes sense because behind the scenes, both of those domains are using and referencing the same cookies to authenticate users. So let's see an example here. You can see that I'm logged out currently from the WordPress admin. Likewise, in the decoupled app, I'm also a logged out user. Let's change that. I'll go ahead and enter my email address and password and hit login. Here in our front-end app, I've now been authenticated and I'm logged in here. And if I head back to this tab and try to navigate to the WordPress admin, we'll see what happens. So as you can see, I'm now logged in here. So even though I didn't enter my email address and password into the WordPress login screen, I'm still taken to the admin here because I'm being authenticated with the valid cookie that I have stored in my browser. So that, this experience may be what you want. You may think, oh, this is cool that my, content creators can, can access the WordPress admin. And then when they head over to the decoupled app, they're automatically logged in there too. That's really convenient, for that to happen. In other cases though, for other applications, you may not want that. You may want to make it so that, users who are using your front end app and are authenticated there have no reason to ever log into the WordPress admin. They don't even know WordPress exists. All they know is the front end app that they interact with. So if that's the kind of experience that you want to create, I have one way of doing that, and that is to use this plugin. So I have this plugin on my GitHub that I created called Headless WordPress Admin Access. So it says here, there's a WordPress plugin to control access to the WordPress admin. If the user trying to visit the WordPress admin does not have the capability this plugin requires, they will be logged out and redirected to the decoupled front-end JavaScript app URL, if set, or otherwise to the WordPress admin login page. All right, and then the steps to use are listed here. And actually, steps 1 through 4 are the ones that we've already done in this code base. If you got set up with this code base locally, 1 through 4 are the steps that we did to set up the WP GraphQL Cores plugin. So then the only ones left would be the remaining ones on the list. So number 4 says, in this plugin's PHP file, modify the logout and redirect non-admins method if desired to limit WordPress admin access to users with a certain capability. Let's see what that looks like. I'll open the PHP file. You can see there's a very small plugin here. There's not much to it. So what we do in this plugin is we run this check, current user can administrator, to see if this person is an admin user, right? If they are an admin user, we go ahead and bail out, and do nothing out of the norm. That person is allowed to log into the WordPress admin, just as they normally would, and that flow is not interrupted. Otherwise, if we make it past this check, we know that the person trying to log in isn't an admin. It's a user with some other role. So in that case, we immediately log them out, and then we try to get the front-end app URL. So this would be the URL for our decoupled JavaScript app. If we have that, if we know what that URL is, then we redirect the user over to the front-end app. Or otherwise, if it's not set, we weren't able to get that front-end app URL, then instead it'll send the user to the admin URL, which would just be the login screen for a traditional WordPress site. So either way, those users get immediately logged out and then sent somewhere else, so they're unable to access the WordPress admin. You could instead swap this capabilities check out for publish posts or edit posts or some other capability, however you want to check to see whether your users should be allowed into the WordPress admin. You could just modify these lines here to make that happen. Let's finish up by talking about how to use this same authentication setup in production environments. What you need to do first is head back to the Cores Settings tab, but this time for your production WordPress backend site. On this tab, you would need to check all of the same boxes that we had at the beginning of this video. So send site credentials, enable login, and enable logout mutation. Those 3 boxes. And for the extend access control allow origin header field here, you would need to paste in the domain for your decoupled front-end JavaScript app. Once you've done those things for your production backend, you can just hit save changes, and the WordPress backend should be all set. For our front-end application, if you recall, we used a .env.local file to specify an environment variable that's used to specify the GraphQL endpoint of our WordPress backend. So instead of this, you would need to define an environment variable wherever you're hosting your front-end JavaScript app, so that at build time and also at runtime, it would have access to this next public WordPress API URL and would be able to send requests to the proper GraphQL endpoint. So with that, we'll wrap things up. I hope that you got a lot out of this video and feel like you now know how to wire up an authentication system using WordPress's native built-in cookies to authenticate users not only on the WordPress backend, but also in your front-end JavaScript application. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.